Thank you, Angela. The first thing I was going to do is ask somebody to get me another glass of wine because mine is just gone. But I understand the bar is closed, so that's my tough luck. What a privilege it is to be here. I am here because I love people like you. And I love people like you because every time I'm feeling a little bit down or I've had a rough week, the first thing I make a mental note to do is to go and talk to a couple of business people. Because business people are so upbeat and so positive. They have to be. They've got no choice. If you want to carry a business through, particularly a small business, through all the adversity and the trials and tribulations of taxation and regulation and overcoming economies of scale and getting to that point of critical mass where you're suddenly beginning to get the cash flow in, you just have to have that reservoir of positivity. And it is such a privilege to be around people like you. And people like me, what are we? We're just commentators. That's all we do. We're hurlers in the ditch. Yes, hopefully we can occasionally illuminate things and maybe shed a bit of light here and there and make us all understand the world a little bit like you. But it's people like you who make this country a great place to live. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing and wish you the very best in this new year. There are between 180 and 240,000 of you, depending on the statistics you look at, in terms of owner-managers, small businesses. So you're part of an army of nearly 250,000, and it's you people who are going to create the recovery. What I want to talk to you about tonight in approximately 10 minutes, I'll try and keep it less than that, is how government should be helping you, but also how we can create a system of thinking to help you. And I'm going to talk to you about something from a country where I grew up, because I actually grew up in Germany. And in Germany they have something called the Mittelstand. And the Mittelstand is a system. The Germans are great for thinking in a very organized way about things. And believe it or not, everybody thinks the German economy is all about Siemens and Bosch and Mercedes-Benz and BMW. And sure, those companies are a very important part of Germany's export success. But believe it or not, the success of Germany, which is the most successful economy in Europe, and actually one of the most reliable and steady Eddie sort of successful economies in terms of the world, you know, it never became too dependent on debt. It's always done well. And the main secret of success is not the big boys, the Bosches, the BMWs. It's actually small to medium-sized enterprises. And that's because they've come up with a system of doing small, medium-sized enterprises. And I want to talk a little bit about that. First of all, what's going on in the economy right now? Well, we got a bit of good news this week. We found out that retail sales, when you strip out motor sales from the economy, because they're a bit volatile, they go up and down like a bit of a seesaw, excluding motor sales, the volume of retail sales is back where it was in March 2006. Now, I know it doesn't feel like that for many of you in the retail sector because margins are very, very thin and times are tough. But it is actually true that the amount of money being spent in the retail sector is roughly where it was in 2006. Why doesn't it feel like that? Well, because instead of a modest amount of big purchases, it's made up of more little purchases. What's happening is, it's not that the economy is recovering yet, although that's about to happen. It's that the population is growing. In 2006, I did something crazy. I had spent 2 years warning about how a crisis was coming. I was economics editor of the Irish Times, and I was writing articles about how financial regulation was out of control, house prices were out of control, and we needed to clamp down on the boom. But I said, hang on, okay, I've got that message out there, and other people had got that message out there, but the crisis was coming. I decided to write a book called The Best Is Yet to Come. And I put 3 chapters in it, warning how in the immediate future the best was not yet to come, that there was going to be a crisis, but that from 2020 onwards, this country would have not only recovered the levels of prosperity during the Celtic Tiger, but would have gone on to better things. Why did I believe that? Well, because I had interviewed a great man called T.K. Whitaker, who's still alive. He's 94. And in 1959, I don't know if any of you were around in 1959, but this country was a very bleak place. We were a country of 3 million, actually 2.5 million, and things were so bad that basically one newspaper had recommended handing the whole country back to Britain with a note of apology for the condition that it was in. 10 years later, we were one of Europe's fastest growing economies. In 1987, when I was doing my Leaving Cert, we were back in a position of bleak despair, hopelessness. Nobody thought things could get better. 10 years later, I started my job, one of my jobs as an economist in the European Central Bank, and the first week I went in, the Economist had a cover of a picture of Ireland on its front page. Ireland, Europe's shining light. By 1997, 10 years after the despair of 87, we were back at growth rates of 6 or 7%. The point about it is we have always proven our capacity to bounce back. It's taken us between 5 and 10 years to do so, but we've done it, and we can do it again, and we're doing it again, and it's thanks to people like you. The problem is government has a real problem getting out of the way. It likes to stand in the way with too much regulation, too much taxation, and too much big government. They all tell us the free market caused the crisis, the lack of regulation caused the crisis. That's not true. Everything that went wrong, bad regulation, too much government spending, bailing out the banks, those were all decisions by politicians. They were not decisions by entrepreneurs. You guys and you ladies were the people who were doing things right. It was government, local government, regulation, central banks, regulators. They were the guys who were getting it wrong. We've got to realize that, and we've got to accept that if we want this recovery to really gather pace, and it can do that, we've got to get government out of the way. And the proof of that is we did actually have a brief recovery before. Retail sales in 2010 grew. They didn't grow by much, but they grew by about 2%. And that happened because in December 2009, the government said, you know what? We're not going to increase taxes anymore. We're going to do something we've never done before. We're going to cut spending. And they did cut spending. And when they cut spending, all the consumers out there said, you know what, great. The government is starting to tackle waste. It means our taxes are going to stop going up. It means we can go out and spend money. And that's exactly what happened. And then along came the Croke Park deal and a lot of other mistakes, like the unfortunate events of November 2010, and taxpayers said, oh gosh, they're taxing us again. So retail sales started to decline, and we slid back into recession. Now, hopefully, the government is getting the message. The last budget, it did have some tax increases, but the emphasis was much more on spending growth, and we're beginning to see retail sales recovery. So hopefully the government is now standing out of the way. But you know what? We have elections coming up in June, European elections and local elections. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for because, to be honest, I don't know. And as a broadcaster, it wouldn't be a profession of me to advise you to vote for one party or another. But I'll tell you one thing. If you are not on the phone at least once a fortnight to your local TD, your local councillor, and your local MEP, complaining about the extortionate level of rates, the extortionately high rate of marginal taxation, the excessively high rate of VAT, and the fact that the government is not reforming as much as it needs to be. If you are not complaining about those things on a regular basis, then you're doing yourself no favours, because government thinks that you're happy, and you shouldn't be happy, because we have too much taxation and too much government in this country, and that is preventing people like you helping us to get back on our feet. So I would urge you, without making a political speech in favour of one party or another, because that's not what it's about, I would just urge you as a group of people to stand up and fight for yourselves. Fight as hard for your interests in the political system as you fight to keep your businesses alive. Now, finally, 2 minutes on a great business system. I've had the privilege of growing up in Germany. I worked there. I grew up there as a small kid. I worked there in the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. I studied there, and they have a great system called the Mittelstand, and it's got many, many positive attributes. Let me mention 3 or 4. The first is a high number of companies that are owner-managers. People who love their companies and own their companies are usually much better at managing them, and that's why the German model is successful. The Anglo-Saxon method of capitalism, which is about shareholders owning the company and somebody else managing it, works a lot for some companies, but the love isn't there, the passion isn't there, and that's where capitalism can go wrong. So the secret of durable businesses is that you love the business you're in and you're managing something and you want it to succeed. Number 2, a great system of education. Now, we obsess about university education in this country, and I have 4 degrees, so I'm a victim of that. But you know what? You don't need to go to university to have an education. Some of the smartest people I know went to a technical college, they got vocational training, or do you know what? They actually did something outrageous. They went out to after the leaving cert, and they actually just rolled up their sleeves and worked hard. And they're some of the most successful and happiest people I know. We need to create an education system, certainly that creates well-rounded, educated citizens who have an understanding of poetry and the Irish language and our history and all that wonderful stuff. But we also have to create a third-level system that makes people into workers in areas where they're going to be working in areas they're happy and productive. I'm not sure we're there yet, and you as business people need to take an interest in that, because if you employ people, you want to be employing people who are actually happy doing the jobs you need them to do, not people who have been educated in areas that actually confuse them and make them unhappy. Third thing we need is we need government support for small, medium-sized enterprises. In fairness, the government is getting a lot better at that. The last budget had a lot of great initiatives for small businesses. And I'm not going to go through them all because I don't have time. We're getting better at it, but it's not yet good enough. Too much taxation, too much regulation. One of the things that is good is the local enterprise offices that is hopefully going to consolidate all the different regulatory authorities that you have to go to into one single office. That's a great initiative, and credit to Richard Bruton there. I'm not making a party political point, but he's one of the guys in politics who's looking out for people like you. But the fourth thing we need is it comes back to passion. The Mittelstand in Germany is great because there is a long-term commitment to loving what they do, and they're always innovating and they're always thinking 5 or 10 or 20 years ahead. Now, they have a lot of advantages. They've got a big population. They're in the middle of the European continent. It's easy for them to export because they've got a huge catchment area. That's why their Mittelstand is based on manufacturing. But you know what? We have this wonderful thing now called the internet and social media, which for the services sector can overcome those barriers, the fact that we're an island economy. So we can't replicate Germany's success in manufacturing. We can, however, begin to emulate a lot of its aspects in the services sector, and we should try, because traded services exports have increased by 300% in the last 10 years. We're living in a world of 7 billion people. There's going to be 1 billion people coming into the middle class areas of spending. We're a small country. We're a bicycle in a traffic jam. Even if there's a stagnation or recession in the world economy, we are so small and so agile. We can weave in and out of that static traffic, and we can grow this country. And we're doing it. Our population is up 400,000 people in the last 7 years, despite recession. That's what I meant about the best is yet to come. This country will always bounce back. I'll leave you with a final joke. It's one I taught at the beginning of the crisis. I shut up about it for a few years because people had heard it too much, but I'm telling it now again because we're at the end of the crisis. It basically revolves around the Y2K crisis. Does anybody remember Y2K? You all remember Y2K? You all remember how the end of the world was coming? Well, it happened once before, in the year 1000 AD, 1,000 years before Y2K. Everybody thought the world was going to end because it was, you know, the big thousand. All kinds of crazy millenarian theories about how comets were going to hit the planet. Well, Y2K was an equivalent of that. And I was in the European Central Bank at the time. And I was given the crappy job of being my floor's Y2K officer. It was basically like being the fire drill officer. You know, it meant nobody thought you were really important. And I had to attend interminably boring and stupid meetings about Y2K and programming. And they invariably involved this argument between a highly paid American consultant, because all highly paid consultants were American in Frankfurt, and a very dignified French manager from the Banque de France who was working for the European Central Bank. And the American consultant at one point said something like, you know, you guys, you just don't understand how grave this crisis is going to be. You've got to completely rewrite all your computer programmings, all your programs. You've got to get rid of hashtags, you've got to get rid of 999, you've got to get rid of colons. If you don't take this seriously, your whole system is going to crash, the euro is going to be a disaster, the entire banking system of the eurozone could collapse. And the French manager looked at this American consultant very skeptically, and he said, you know, monsieur, he said, I think you're exaggerating about the effect of Y2K. I think your problem is American. You are Americans, that is your problem. You see, I'm French, and in France, we have already seen Y1K, and believe me, it was fine. Ladies and gentlemen, we're meeting, my final words to you are, we're meeting in the crypt of a church, which I noted to Darren here, who's the man who very effectively runs the place. I have slight reservations as a practicing Christian about having a business meeting. I was walking out and this is very sacrilegious of me. This is a place which should be used for religious worship, and I felt very, very uncomfortable about it. I had sort of bad thoughts about hands reaching out of the floor and, you know, grabbing me by the legs and pulling me down. But then I philosophized about it a little bit, and I thought, well, you know what, Christianity 2,000 years ago, we're talking about the millennium, 2,000 years ago, Christians were a persecuted minority. And I don't know if you've ever been to Rome. If you haven't been, go, because it's a beautiful city. The Christians used to meet in the catacombs. They were underground places, a little bit like this. They weren't as funky as this. The wine wasn't as nice, but they used to meet and gather to support each other and to help each other. So I feel that in a sense, you guys, the Christians back then were a persecuted minority. You guys, in a way, are a persecuted minority, and we're gathered here together to support and help each other. But you know what? That persecuted minority, they eventually took over and won, and you will too.